Hello, James Powell. Now we're going to talk in this unit about ancient city-states and the first religions of the first agriculturally based city-states. And we're going to look at the idea too of sacred language, and that's what I'd like to discuss right now. And the first issue to clear up is, what does this word myth mean? In the Greek, mutos means, in essence, human language used to express inexpressible realities. So when we talk about myth, we can see it in science. In the Big Bang, it was neither big nor a bang in the very beginning. It could be called the beautiful bloom, for that matter. So we use human language because our human language is limited and doesn't often even include our intuitional, our gut level knowledge, that second brain that has more neurons than this thing. So we think of myth, and we have several types of myth. One of those, the first and maybe most famous, is the cosmological function of myth. And here, myth defines the beginnings and the ends of time, the nature of our universe, what lies beyond this world and the like. But in particular, how does a religious myth, or any myth for that matter, shape our idea of the universe? Then myths also have sociological functions. I can think readily of the caste system in India. And there we have the myth of the cosmic man, sorry ladies, that's the language they use, who dissolves himself and his mouth becomes the Brahmins. His arms become the warriors, and his thighs the merchants, the farmers his feet, and the untouchables, well, they're untouchable. So there is a myth that serves to legitimate a social system, the myth of Prajapati. Myth also expresses metaphysical realities, and of course meta means beyond, physis means nature, so beyond nature, beyond a naturalistic worldview, it is then thought by so many that there are mysterious beings. Maybe they're called angels or bodhisattvas and the like, Hindu gods, and everything else beyond this natural world, and things in which people believe. And of course, whether we agree with their belief or not, as a phenomenologist, we can't deny their belief exists and shapes the world all of us live in. Then myth also expresses psychological aspects of religion. For example, myths about heaven, or the various Indian heavens and hells, and possible reincarnations, or better translated as rebirths, punarjanma for that matter, these myths of these other worlds, the worlds of the ancestors in Confucian tradition, and for that matter in Hindu tradition also, all of these myths help us to deal with death and dying, marriage and birth, and transitions to adulthood. So myths serve all these functions and more, and we can't live without them. Even science needs to use human language to express what really our normal, naturalistic, objective minds can't fathom. Then we have parable. Parables are stories with an alternative meaning. Now, one of these most famous parables is the story of the prodigal son, as told by Jesus of Nazareth, whom Christians call the Christ. In this, Jesus tells about a story about a father who had two sons. One worked hard, was very obedient and respectful. The other was profligate and sloth-like. And so one of the sons, the lazier one, asked his father, "I'd like my inheritance now, please." And then his father reluctantly gave him his inheritance early. I'm not sure why. At any rate, the son goes off and spends it all on wine, women, and song, living with pigs in the end, till he decides that being a slave in his own father's house is preferable to the life he had as a sinner. And he comes back, and the son, the older one, says, "Well, Father, what will you do?" And his father said, "My son has come home. I will welcome him with love and open arms." The older son is resentful because he'd been obedient and stayed faithful to his father. And his father, nevertheless, gave up the fatted calf to his son. And so the son was welcomed home. The older brother still gets his share for sure. But what is the meaning behind that? The meaning behind that is that God, the Father in the story, will love the sinner even more than the righteous. There's a stand-in meaning for the righteous Jews who, the Gospels at least, have us with Jesus challenging all the time. And so the prodigal son is a story about God's love for the wayward person and how you're always welcome home. Now, another thing we want to differentiate here is the idea of first and second levels of discourse. So we can think in terms of first level discourse as a saying of Confucius or a statement by one of the Greek gods in a text as quoted by another writer. We could think of first level discourse as the statement of a Hindu god, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, all these things. That is the first level. The second level has so many more elements as communities, real religious communities, try to interpret a text into their lives. And so here we see, first of all, exegesis, reading out of the text and trying to interpret the meaning for maybe religious communities generations removed. And so after exegesis, we have sacred histories. Think how important the genealogies are in the Hebrew Bible. We find the beget so-and-so and Obadiah beget Zechariah and the like all over the Hebrew Bible. And again, it's in the Gospels of Luke and Matthew, the genealogy of Jesus. These sacred histories trace us back as religious communities, back in time, to become rooted in this continuum of this time-space tube we're all in, and thus construct sacred histories. And this could be sacred histories of Confucian family lineages, stories about the ancestors and the like. Then every community also engages in apologetic religious language. Apologetic religious language is simply the defense of one's position. And so often Catholics are asked, do Catholics worship Mary? And well, the answer is no, not worship. Venerate, yes. But worship is intended only for the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So there is an explanation why Catholics, in fact, cannot be said to worship Mary. Critical thinking is involved, of course, in all these aspects of secondary religious discourse. But in particular, understanding earlier meanings of texts, how creeds evolve through time, how religious and social structures also change and evolve through time and space. We see all of these things covered by critical thinking. Next, religious communities have to determine how they're going to behave. And of course, again, the Greek is helpful. Ethos means behavior. And so how do religious texts guide ethics? We can think in particular the example of the Essenes at Qumran, out in the desert as an ecstatic cult. Their entire lives were governed by their writings, and these writings reinforced by the social structures and the many rituals they had to welcome the end of days as they saw it coming. Finally, we even see language in visual form through the presence of icons and mandalas and the like. Oddly enough, language can even be kinetic and expressed through one's body. The Indians have a tradition of hand gesture communication called mudra. I could use an American version since, well, that's my audience mostly. And if I do this with my hands, well, that means okay. And so many other ways we communicate sacred truths through our very bodies. And that is where ritual will come in a future unit. So there is no way a religious community can escape sacred language. And again, if my contention that science is a religion is true, what would be among the sacred texts? Surely The Origin of Species by Darwin would be on that list, and so many, many more.